It was supposed to be a routine event, another measured speech, another calm appearance from a former president who had long since left the daily political battlefield. But then, in the middle of a quiet pause, Barack Obama looked straight ahead, his voice steady, and delivered a line about Charlie Kirk that no one in the audience saw coming. The words weren't shouted, they weren't wrapped in anger, they were deliberate, sharpened, and carried the kind of weight that instantly reshapes a room. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, then silence. Phones whipped into the air as people tried to capture the moment before it slipped into rumor. Even seasoned reporters in the room froze, their pens hovering above notepads. Obama had spoken a truth that felt like it had been waiting in the air for years. And now that it was finally said, no one could believe how directly he had named it. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from disinterest, but the kind that hangs heavy. When people realize they've just witnessed something, they'll replay again and again. It wasn't just a comment on Charlie Kirk. It was a statement about arrogance, about what America tolerates, about how dignity responds to provocation. And here's the thing. If you think you know what Obama said, you don't. It wasn't the easy jab people expected. It wasn't a recycled line from campaign speeches past. It was something sharper, more personal, almost cinematic in its timing. One sentence, and suddenly the power dynamic in the room shifted. Kirk wasn't even there, yet somehow the air crackled with the sense that he'd been cut down to size. People looked at each other, wide-eyed, searching for confirmation that they'd actually heard what they thought they'd heard. Within seconds, the clip was racing through the internet, spliced, subtitled, captioned in a dozen different ways. And every version carried the same haunting beat, the pause, the delivery, the silence after the words landed. What Obama said that night wasn't just unexpected, it was seismic. And once you hear it, you'll understand why the internet exploded, why headlines lit up, and why the story of a single sentence turned into a cultural earthquake. But to understand the impact of those words, you first have to understand the storm that led up to them. To grasp why Obama's words landed like a thunderclap, you have to first understand the figure they were aimed at. Charlie Kirk isn't just another conservative commentator. He is a provocateur, someone who has built an entire career out of saying the kinds of things that demand a reaction. Through Turning Point USA, his organization that targets young audiences on college campuses, Kirk has sharpened his brand into a weapon of confrontation. He thrives on short, explosive sound bites designed to go viral, designed to leave his opponents off balance and his followers energized. To his fans, he's the truth teller, the fighter against woke culture, the man who owns the libs in debate after debate. But to his critics, he's the face of arrogance, dismissive, sneering, deliberately inflammatory. He knows that in a media landscape built on outrage, attention is currency, and Charlie Kirk is rich in it. Every viral clip, every confrontation on a college quad, every sharp insult, it's fuel for the fire he's been stoking for years. Now place that against the backdrop of America itself in recent years, a country divided. With politics transformed into a battlefield of identities, the middle ground feels almost extinct. On one side, a movement fueled by fear of change, clinging to provocation as strategy. On the other, communities who have fought for dignity, equality, and recognition, who look for leadership that speaks with calm rather than fury. In this polarized climate, Kirk isn't just a commentator, he's a symbol of one America. Loud and uncompromising. And then there's Barack Obama. The other America, measured, dignified. A man who doesn't need to raise his voice to command attention. For years, he has been a kind of living reminder of a more hopeful politics, even as cynicism has spread. To see these two figures collide, even indirectly, was to witness two worldviews in direct confrontation. One thrives on provocation. The other believes in composure. One looks for the quick hit. The other plays the long game. That's why the stakes were so high. This wasn't just about a passing remark. It wasn't about petty words exchanged across a distance. It was about a fundamental clash between arrogance and dignity, between soundbite culture and statesmanship. The arena wasn't a debate stage or a college campus. It was the very soul of how America sees itself, angry and divided, or calm and steady. And this is where the tension builds. For years, people wondered if Obama would ever directly acknowledge voices like Kirk's. He had brushed off insults before, kept his focus on larger issues, often refusing to be dragged into the mud. That was part of his style. Never let arrogance pull you down to its level. But on this night, something was different. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of reckless rhetoric. Maybe it was the rising stakes of a country split down the middle. Or maybe it was just time. Because when Obama finally chose to speak, when he finally decided to break the silence and say something about Charlie Kirk, it wasn't just a line. It was a line in the sand. And then, Obama decided to respond in a way that shocked everyone. Charlie Kirk did not emerge out of nowhere. His story is one of strategy, timing, and an uncanny understanding of how modern media rewards spectacle over substance. Born in Illinois in 1993, Kirk grew up in a politically active household, absorbing the language of conservatism at a young age. But unlike traditional political operatives who climbed the ladder through campaigns and policy papers, Kirk's genius and his downfall lay in realizing that the battlefield of his generation was not Washington, D.C., but the digital screen and the college campus. In 2012, at just 18 years old, he founded Turning Point USA. The organization's mission sounded straightforward: promote free markets and conservative values among young people. But the strategy was sharper, more theatrical. Kirk understood that campuses were fertile ground for confrontation. Professors, activists, and students often leaned left, which gave him an endless supply of adversaries. Instead of quietly advocating policies, Kirk staged his presence as a cultural counterattack. He didn't just want to convince, he wanted to provoke. His formula was simple: set up a booth, stage a confrontation, post the footage online, and watch it explode. In a country where owning the libs had become its own currency, Kirk printed money. His videos spread like wildfire among conservative circles hungry for validation. To them, Kirk was fearless, a young warrior willing to stand toe-to-toe with the supposed intellectual elite. To his critics, he was smug, opportunistic, and addicted to cheap theatrics. That duality, hero to some, villain to others, became his brand. On conservative talk shows, Kirk carried himself with brash confidence, presenting himself as a truth-teller, unafraid of political correctness. He thrived on being dismissed by mainstream media, spinning every criticism as proof that he was striking a nerve. Every protest against his campus appearances became a badge of honor. He framed pushback not as rejection, but as confirmation. If the left hated him, then he must be right. But behind the image of youthful bravado was a pattern that critics quickly learned to recognize. Kirk had a habit of oversimplifying complex issues, turning nuance into slogans. He spoke in absolutes, framing opponents as radical enemies rather than fellow citizens with different views. And whenever contradictions in his arguments surfaced, he brushed them aside with a smirk, doubling down rather than reflecting. Controversies followed him like a shadow. Turning Point USA faced allegations of fostering a toxic culture and even mishandling finances. Former employees described an environment more focused on celebrity-style branding than grassroots organizing. Critics accused him of exploiting young conservatives for his own rise, while allies defended him as a necessary fighter in a culture war. Through it all, Kirk remained unfazed, spinning the narrative back to his favorite role, the lone soldier fighting against overwhelming odds. What made him polarizing wasn't just his words, but the posture behind them. He projected an air of untouchability, a sense that he was always the smartest person in the room, that his opponents were merely stepping stones on his path to influence. On stage, he wielded sarcasm like a weapon. Online, he mastered the art of baiting his critics into amplifying his name. In his world, attention was proof of impact, and controversy was a measure of success. And yet, beneath the noise, cracks in the image began to show. For all his certainty, Kirk often contradicted himself, praising free speech one moment, dismissing dissent the next. For all his talk of personal responsibility, he leaned heavily on wealthy donors and political patrons, to fuel his rise. For all his claims of being the authentic voice of the people, crafted himself into a brand as polished and rehearsed as any establishment figure he mocked out to his base. They weren't looking for consistency. They were looking for someone who could make them feel powerful in a world where they felt dismissed. Kirk's sneer, his interruptions, his quick jabs at professors and activists, these were cathartic moments for his supporters. But to everyone else, they were proof of arrogance. The kind of arrogance that eventually invites a reckoning. Because history shows that arrogance always meets its match. No matter how high it climbs, no matter how loud it shouts, there comes a moment when confidence turns into overreach, and overreach turns into vulnerability. Charlie Kirk had built a career out of believing he could say anything, dismiss anyone, and walk away untouchable. But what he didn't anticipate was that one day, someone of Obama's stature, calm, deliberate, and infinitely more respected, would choose to answer him. And when that moment came, all the bravado in the world couldn't prepare Kirk for how small his arrogance would suddenly appear. For arrogance has a habit of meeting its match. Barack Obama's story has never been just about politics. It is about the improbable journey of a man who began far from the centers of wealth and power, and yet came to embody the very possibility of America's promise. Born in Honolulu in 1961 to a Kenyan father and a mother from Kansas, life was stitched together by contrasting worlds, black and white, American and global, modest beginnings and lofty aspirations. That blend of cultures and struggles gave him a perspective that would later shape not only his politics, but also his temperament, calm in the face of chaos, steady when others flinched, unlike Charlie Kirk, who sought attention by creating confrontation. Obama's early career was defined by listening. After graduating from Columbia University, he turned down lucrative corporate paths and instead chose to work as a community organizer on the south side of Chicago. The neighborhoods were struggling with job loss, housing decay, and crime. His job wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with cameras or viral clips. It meant sitting in church basements, knocking on doors, and learning the frustrations of ordinary families. This was the crucible where Obama forged his belief that real change comes not from the loudest voice in the room, but from the one who brings people together. Those early years taught him patience. When a meeting grew tense, he didn't escalate. He waited, listened, reframed, and found common ground. When skepticism met him, as it often did, given his youth and outsider background, he didn't strike back with arrogance. He responded with quiet persistence. Again and again, he showed that composure is not weakness, but strength. It was here that he began to build the eloquence that would later move millions, words rooted in empathy. Sharpened by lived struggle, law school at Harvard gave him the platform to hone those gifts further. As the first black president of the Harvard Law Review, Obama proved that intellect and humility could coexist. He could spar with the best legal minds without losing his cool. He could command respect without shouting. And when he returned to Chicago as a law professor and later as a state senator, he carried with him the same habits he had learned as an organizer. Listen first, then speak with purpose. By the time he stepped onto the national stage in 2004, with that now famous Democratic National Convention speech, America saw something unusual. Here was a man who did not belittle his opponents, who did not sneer or mock. Instead, he spoke of unity, of hope, of the audacity to believe in a country where out of many, we are one. His words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they rang true. Contrast that with Kirk-style rapid-fire jabs, soundbite theatrics, provocation for its own sake. Obama represented the opposite. Where Kirk thrived on dividing rooms, Obama sought to bridge them. Where Kirk dismissed critics with sarcasm, Obama acknowledged them and reframed. Where Kirk wore arrogance like armor, Obama carried dignity like a quiet flame. The two men did not merely differ in ideology. They embodied two utterly different approaches to leadership, and yet Obama's path to the presidency was anything but easy. He faced doubts at every stage, too young, too inexperienced, too black for a country still wrestling with its deepest prejudices. He endured attacks on his faith, his heritage, even his very legitimacy as an American. Through it all, he refused to take the bait. When others went low, he stayed calm. When the noise grew deafening, he spoke slowly, deliberately, making each word count. That composure became not just a tactic, but a trademark. As president, the same qualities defined him. In moments of crisis, financial collapse, wars abroad, mass shootings at home, he became the voice people looked to for steadiness. He didn't rush. He didn't rant. He delivered. And even when critics accused him of being too cool, too detached, his supporters recognized it for what it was, the discipline of a man who knew that leadership isn't about feeding chaos, it's about calming it. This is why years after leaving office, Obama still commands an audience like few others. When he steps to a microphone, people lean in, not because they expect fireworks, but because they expect clarity. His presence carries a gravitas that Kirk's bluster could never manufacture. His words carry the weight of lived struggle, of earned respect. He doesn't need to own. If anyone to win a crowd, he wins them by reminding them of their own better angels. This wasn't just another politician. This was a man who knew when to stay silent and when to strike. And that's why, when he finally decided to say something about Charlie Kirk, the stakes felt monumental. It wasn't just about two men. It was about two Americas colliding, one loud, brash, desperate for attention, and the other dignified, calm, quietly powerful. So when Obama finally addressed Kirk, people braced for impact. The stage was set in a hall packed with students, reporters, and political junkies who had come expecting sparks. The event wasn't billed as a showdown, but everyone in the room could feel the electricity in the air. Charlie Kirk, armed with his signature confidence, wasted no time in turning the atmosphere into a battlefield. He leaned into the microphone with the swagger of someone who knew how to work a crowd, tossing out his first barb with a grin that dared anyone to challenge him. Funny. Isn't it, Kirk said, how some people talk about unity and hope, but spend 8 years dividing this country? The line landed with a mix of gasps and scattered applause from his supporters in the audience. Kirk soaked it in, clearly enjoying the reaction, clearly aware that cameras were rolling. Obama didn't move. He sat with his hands loosely folded, expression unreadable. He didn't flinch at the jab, didn't rush to counter. Instead, he simply nodded, as though he had heard it all before. That composure itself was a message one the audience immediately picked up on. But Kirk wasn't done. He leaned forward again, voice sharper this time. You know, some people get praised for eloquence, but I say if you can't tell the truth without dressing it up in flowery words, maybe you don't deserve the praise in the first place. The tone was mocking. His smirk designed to needle again. Obama stayed silent. His calm felt almost unnerving, like a veteran chess player letting a rookie burn through moves too quickly. The audience shifted, some uncomfortable, some thrilled, all of them waiting. Kirk, sensing the silence as an opening, pressed harder. He rattled off a series of talking points about immigration, culture, and what he claimed were the failures of elite politicians. His words came rapid fire, each one edged with sarcasm. "We've had enough of the smooth talkers," he declared. "What we need are people who tell it like it is, not people who smile while the country suffers." Each insult landed, but Obama's silence only made the anticipation grow. The crowd began to murmur, the tension thickening. Was he going to let Kirk get away with it? Or was he waiting for the perfect moment? The cameras zoomed in, sensing history in the making. And yet through it all, Obama's body language never shifted. Calm, patient, eyes steady. He let the storm rage, and by doing so, he made Kirk's performance look smaller with every passing second. It was as if the louder Kirk became, the quieter and more commanding Obama's presence felt. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side, Kirk thrived on noise, feeding off his own bravado, raising his voice as though volume equaled truth. On the other, Obama embodied restraint, a reminder that true power often requires no theatrics. People in the audience began leaning forward, whispering to each other, sensing something was coming. The silence stretched. Every second without a response made the eventual reply feel heavier. Even Kirk seemed to notice, his barbs growing sharper, his rhythm less smooth. He wanted a reaction, craved it, but the longer Obama withheld, the more the stage tilted in his favor. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Obama shifted in his seat. A subtle movement, but enough to make the room hold its breath. He adjusted the microphone slowly, deliberately. The murmurs died instantly. Every eye was fixed on him. Then came the moment no one expected. The microphone sat in front of him, waiting. For minutes, Obama had absorbed every barb, every provocation, letting the tension rise like steam in a kettle. Now, as the audience leaned in, he finally leaned forward. Slowly, deliberately, he glanced at the crowd, then back at the stage lights, and finally locked his gaze on the cameras that were broadcasting every second. It was as if he wanted to make sure not only the people in the room heard him, but the entire country. His voice, when it came, was soft at first. Not loud, not defensive, soft enough that the room had to quiet itself to listen. "You know," he began, pausing after the first two words, "I've heard a lot tonight about truth." Another pause. He let it hang long enough that even Kirk shifted uneasily in his chair. "And I have to say, sometimes the loudest person in the room isn't the one telling it." The line hit like a drumbeat. The silence that followed was immediate, total. The crowd inhaled, holding its breath, waiting to see where he would take it. Obama looked down briefly, almost as if choosing his words with care, then looked back up. His eyes steady. "I've been in politics a long time. I've met people from every background you can imagine. Folks who agree with me, folks who don't. And what I've learned is that confidence is easy. Arrogance is easy. But character?" He paused again, letting the rhythm settle in. "That's hard. That takes time. That takes listening. And too often, what we see now isn't leadership, it's performance." The audience stirred. Some nodded, some whispered. Obama's tone was calm, but each word carried the weight of authority. Like a parent scolding without raising their voice. And then the pivot. He straightened, his voice growing firmer, though still steady. "Now, I don't know Charlie Kirk personally," he said, letting the name linger as though placing it under a spotlight. The crowd stiffened, knowing he had finally said it out loud. "But I've seen the clips. I've seen the way he talks to young people, the way he dismisses anyone who doesn't fit his box. And look, everybody's entitled to their opinions. That's America. But when your whole career is built on tearing people down instead of lifting them up, that's not truth-telling. That's just noise." Gasps rippled through the audience. The words weren't shouted, but the impact was seismic. Obama hadn't insulted him directly. He hadn't raised his voice. But in those few sentences, he had distilled Kirk's entire persona into something small, hollow and performative. Kirk tried to maintain his smirk, but the cameras caught it, the flicker in his expression, the tightening of his jaw. The air in the room had shifted and he knew it. Obama wasn't finished. He leaned back slightly, as though comfortable, almost conversational now. "See, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time listening to people who were hurting, people who felt forgotten. And the thing about listening is, it humbles you. It reminds you that you're not always the smartest person in the room. You don't have all the answers. And if you're lucky, it teaches you that dignity matters more than applause." The crowd was silent again, hanging on every word. Then came the line, the one that would replay across every platform within minutes, the one that would become the meme, the headline, the punchline, and the lesson all at once. Charlie Kirk talks a lot about owning people, about winning arguments, but here's the thing. When your only goal is to own others, eventually, you end up owning nothing that lasts. The eruption was immediate. The room exploded with cheers, laughter, and applause. Some people jumped to their feet, clapping above their heads. Others just stared, stunned by the precision of the blow. The words weren't cruel, but they were devastating. In one sentence, Obama had dismantled Kirk's entire brand, the arrogance, performative swagger, the obsession with owning opponents. And just as quickly, Obama let the noise die down. He raised his hand slightly, signaling calm, and the room quieted again. "Look," he continued, voice even softer now, "this isn't about Charlie. This is about all of us. The question we've got to ask is simple. Do we want a politics that makes us smaller, that reduces every debate to a shouting match? Or do we want a politics that makes us bigger, that challenges us to be better?" It was classic Obama, turning the personal into the universal, the jab into a lesson. The audience nodded, many visibly moved. Kirk, on the other hand, shifted in his seat, fumbling for a response. He leaned toward his mic, trying to muster his usual swagger. Well, he began with a forced laugh. "I guess that's easy to say when you've got a Netflix deal and $1 million book contract." His tone was sharp, but the words fell flat. The contrast was glaring. Obama calm, measured, dignified. Kirk defensive, rattled, scrambling for footing. The room didn't cheer his comeback. It barely reacted at all. Obama simply smiled, not mocking, but with the kind of knowing calm that says, "This conversation is over, even if you keep talking." He leaned back, folded his hands again, and let the silence hang. The crowd's loyalty had already shifted. The cameras had already captured the moment. It was a mic drop without ever needing to drop the SMI. Replay-worthy, meme-worthy, the kind of moment that travels faster than context. Carried by the sheer weight of delivery, people in the audience were already tweeting, already texting, already imagining the headlines. Obama dismantles Kirk with one line, "For Charlie Kirk." It was the nightmare scenario, not a screaming match he could thrive in, not a shouting war where volume might save him. It was death by calm precision, by the very qualities he could never replicate. But the impact didn't stop in that room. The moment the clip hit the internet, it detonated like a cultural grenade. Within minutes, hashtags began climbing the charts. Hashtag Obama, mic drop, hashtag Kirk owned, hashtag truth over noise. Twitter feeds flooded with short videos, each capturing the same sequence. The pause, the delivery, the stunned silence, the eruption. Every angle, every replay made the line land harder. People weren't just watching it. They were reliving it, dissecting it, savoring it. On TikTok, the audio of Obama's line about owning nothing that lasts was already being remixed. One creator set it to dramatic orchestral music, captions flashing across the screen like a trailer for a movie. Another slowed it down, giving Obama's words a booming, echoing weight, as if they were carved into stone. Memes sprouted overnight. Kirk's face photoshopped onto crumbling statues. Obama framed as a samurai delivering the final clean strike. The internet didn't just consume the moment, it mythologized it. Commentators rushed to weigh in. Progressive voices praised the dignity of the response, calling it a masterclass in restraint and precision. "This is why Obama remains untouchable," one columnist wrote. "He doesn't need to shout. He doesn't need to bully. He dismantles with clarity." On MSNBC, clips played in a loop while panels debated how the exchange symbolized the clash between performance politics and substantive leadership. But the defense came swiftly too. Conservative media circled wagons around Kirk, portraying him as a victim of elitist mockery. Obama had his fancy words, one right-wing pundit sneered. But Charlie Kirk is the one who speaks for real Americans. Fox News anchors reframed the viral line as proof that the left disrespects anyone who challenges their worldview. For Kirk's loyal followers, the sting of the moment became a rallying cry, another attack from the establishment they despise. Still, no matter how fiercely defenders spun, the cultural tide had shifted. The sheer volume of memes, parodies, and celebratory posts dwarfed the outrage. Celebrities joined the chorus. Comedians reenacted the mic drop on late-night shows. Musicians quoted the line in tweets. Athletes shared the clip with fire emojis. Even unexpected figures, retired generals, tech moguls, activists, weighed in, each attaching their own interpretation. For a brief window, America wasn't arguing about inflation or foreign policy. It was arguing about a sentence, about style, about truth. Everyday Americans joined the fray too. College students posted reaction videos, some in tears, saying they felt seen in a way political debates rarely deliver. Immigrant families shared the clip across WhatsApp groups, framing it as proof that dignity can triumph over arrogance. One viral Facebook post captured the sentiment perfectly. For once, I didn't feel small watching politics. I felt proud. Like maybe words can still matter. It wasn't just about entertainment. The moment tapped into something deeper, something communal. People felt like they had witnessed history, not because a policy changed, but because a narrative shifted. Obama's calm dismantling of Kirk wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a symbolic clash of two Americas. And in the replay, millions chose their side. Yet beneath the noise, the memes and the applause, a quieter conversation began to take shape. Commentators on podcasts, in essays, and around dinner tables started asking, why did this land so powerfully? Why did one line resonate so deeply? Was it simply nostalgia for Obama's eloquence? Or was it a hunger for a different kind of politics, one rooted in dignity rather than destruction? The internet rarely pauses to reflect, but in this case, it couldn't help itself. Something had cracked open, and for many, the feeling lingered long after the hashtags trended and the memes had their run, because beyond the memes, there was a deeper meaning behind Obama's words. In the days that followed, the noise of memes and headlines began to fade, but the echo of Obama's words refused to die down. The line replayed not just because it cut into Charlie Kirk, but because it reminded people of something bigger, something enduring. This was never just a clash between two men on a stage. It was a reminder of the fork in the road that every generation faces: arrogance or humility, ego or service, noise or truth. Obama's statement lived because it wasn't rooted in insult. It was rooted in principle. He didn't need to mock or belittle. He simply held up a mirror to Kirk, yes, but also to an entire culture that mistakes volume for vision. And in that reflection, people saw the hollowness of arrogance. They saw how quickly a performance can collapse when held against the quiet weight of dignity. The contrast was stark. Kirk, loud, brash, riding the energy of provocation, represented a kind of politics that thrives on division and contempt. Obama, calm, patient, measured, embodied something older. Something steadier, the belief that leadership is not about dominating the room, but about lifting it. His words reminded listeners that true strength doesn't shout. True strength doesn't sneer. True strength, when it finally speaks, doesn't need to explain itself. It just resonates. And that's why the moment traveled so far, why it's stuck in the minds of so many. Because deep down, people are weary of arrogance. They are weary of leaders who treat politics as performance, who confuse cruelty with courage. Obama's response was a kind of antidote, a reminder that dignity is not weakness. That silence, when chosen wisely, is not surrender. That composure is not detachment, but power. This moment wasn't just about Charlie Kirk, it was about all of us. About the moments in our lives when we are tempted to lash out, to meet arrogance with arrogance, insult with insult. It was about remembering that dignity is a choice, and that choosing it doesn't just protect us, it inspires others. For immigrants who have been mocked, for young people told their dreams are impossible, for families who have endured condescension, Obama's words became a kind of quiet rallying cry. You don't need to shout to stand tall. The crescendo of meaning built slowly, like a tide rising. What people took away wasn't just that Kirk had been owned. What they took away was the deeper truth. Arrogance has a short shelf life, but dignity endures. The ego demands attention in the moment. Leadership leaves echoes for decades. And in that room, in that exchange, America was reminded of which voice truly lasts, as the camera flash faded and the headlines moved on. The moral of the moment remained. We all face versions of that stage. At work, at school, in our communities, we all face the Kirks of our lives, the voices that seek to belittle, to provoke, to distract. And in those moments, the lesson is clear. You don't win by becoming louder than them. You win by being truer than them. Because when the noise dies down, what remains is not the arrogance of the bully, but the dignity of the leader. And in that way, Obama's words were never really about Charlie Kirk at all. They were about us, about the choice we make each day between being consumed by hate or guided by truth. And that is why the moment will be remembered. Not for its viral replay, not for the memes, but for the way it reframed the battle lines. Ego versus leadership, arrogance versus service. A reminder that the arc of dignity may be quiet, but it bends further, lasts longer, and always leaves the deepest mark no one expected. Obama to say this about Charlie Kirk, and maybe that's why the moment felt so powerful. Because it wasn't rehearsed theater, it wasn't bluster, it was dignity speaking truth in real time. A reminder that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the one history remembers. What Obama gave us wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a lesson delivered in a single line about the kind of leadership we need and the kind of people we can choose to be. Arrogance may win a headline, but dignity wins the future. And in an age where noise dominates, that truth feels more revolutionary than ever. This story wasn't only about Kirk. It wasn't even just about Obama. It was about us, about what we value, about who we look to for guidance, and about the kind of country we're building together. And that's why this moment matters far beyond a single stage or a viral clip. So if this message resonates with you, if you believe that dignity can outlast arrogance, that truth can outshine performance, that calm resolve can still shake the walls of power, then join us. Subscribe, share this video, and be part of the movement to amplify voices that remind us of who we can be at our best. Because when we spread moments like these, we do more than tell a story. We build a community. A community that refuses to be defined by noise and division, and instead rises on dignity and truth. And in the end, that's the lesson. Because when dignity speaks, the world listens.